Hey Saints, I saw a great episode of Informed Saints. I don't know if you guys have seen that podcast on YouTube, but it's fantastic. It has the Rapleys, so it has Neil Rapley, a Book of Mormon researcher, Jasmine Rapley, who is no slouch in apologetics, and it also has Stephen Smoot, who has done a number of books and articles, who is, I believe, his forte is Egyptology, but has a number of other expertise, and he's fantastic. I've started thinking of these guys as like the Justice League of apologists. You have uh, you have Jasmine Rappley, obviously an archetype for Wonder Woman, whose main weapon is not just her sword or her shield, but the lasso of truth. And then you have Neil Rapley. Now, I went back and forth between Superman and Batman for him, but I've actually landed on Batman because I think his superpower is that he is prepared. And if you want to see a great example of this, I would recommend looking at or trying to find his response to Trent Horn. Trent Horn did this video talking about the size of the plates and that the characters couldn't fit on it or whatever. And if you go to Neil Rapley's response video that he did, it is amazing, like very, very detailed, showing that that's just simply not the case. And then you have Stephen Smoot. Now, people might say that this is a slight, but it is not in my mind. I say he is the Green Lantern of this team, where Green Lantern's main power is his willpower. Stephen Smoot is fantastic. I really mean this. When I think of a lot of the apologists, a lot of our really popular apologists they're starting to get older. You know, you have legends like Daniel C. Peterson, who's been at this for years and is amazing and has a huge body of work when it comes to his scholarship. And you have Terrell Givens, and you have Blake Ostler, and you have John Welch. But when it comes to new dogs, Stephen Smoot, I think, is going to be the one you want to look out for. I think he's going to end up producing a very interesting body of work when it comes to his articles and books. And I've already read his guide to the Book of Abraham, and I also bought his compilation of the uncanonized revelations of Joseph Smith. And then in this most recent episode, not well, the one I just recently saw from Informed Saints, we're talking about the Pearl of Great Price. Stephen Smoot talks about his study guide for the entire Pearl of Great Price and its history on how it was compiled and how it came to be. And there was so much in that like 45-minute podcast that hadn't really I didn't really know. You have to watch this. You guys have probably already watched this, to be honest. If you're watching my channel, the chance that you haven't watched Informed Saints, which I think that has like tens of thousands of views already, is probably pretty low. But I really have learned a lot from Stephen Smoot's work already. And I wanted to talk today about the Book of Abraham. So I highly recommend reading literature about the Book of Abraham. It's a very popular attack method for those who argue against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And just a little bit of reading on the subject will make it so that virtually no normie will be able to dunk on you about the Book of Abraham, because most of them just have very shallow critiques once you start actually studying the literature. I started with John Gee's An Introduction to the Book of Abraham, which I still highly recommend. And then I read Stephen Smoot's A Guide to the Book of Abraham. And you can also go to Scripture Central, that has a number of very easy to follow articles regarding the Book of Abraham. And what I have come to feel, or what I've come to understand, this is more than a feeling, as I've studied the scholarship regarding the Book of Abraham, is I believe that the Book of Abraham is indeed an ancient text. I think it truly does come from an ancient text. And some of the things that I would highlight as amazing concurrences that lean me towards that it is indeed an ancient text are things like the plain of Olishem, which has been attested in Akkadian sources. Um, it's the right transliteration, the right time, and one of the possible places for Abraham. So there's a number of concurrences when it comes to the plain of Olishem. It's a very weird bullseye for Joseph Smith to make. And then there's just many other things in regards to interesting names and uses that he makes in the Book of Abraham. There's things in the facsimiles and then in the text itself. But when it comes to the text itself, because that's what most critics, they don't actually engage with the 5 chapters. It's only 5 chapters. Most of them haven't read it. They don't actually engage with it. But what I find is, one, I do believe that it matches an ancient genre of writing, specifically Abraham chapter 3. And I believe that Abraham 4 and 5 is actually a better representation of the ancient Israelite worldview of the creation myths. So a lot of scholars like John H. Walton, who wrote a really good book called The Lost World of Genesis 1, and many other scholars point out now, they have a better understanding of it, that Genesis 1, the creation narrative, does not represent a teaching of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. And Abraham 4 and 5 clearly teach creatio ex materia, creation from existing materials. This very explicit teaching in the Book of Abraham better represents the ancient Israelite view than modern translations and interpretations of the creation myths found in Genesis. The other one that I would point out to that better scholarship has fleshed out is the concept of a divine council. So that is that El Elyon, the Most High God, has a pantheon of Bene Elohim, the sons of God, that he rules over. And so you have a huge body of scholarship, which I would recommend Dr. Michael Heiser in The Unseen Realm, that flesh out the divine council worldview that is in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. And this is explicitly represented in the language used in the Book of Abraham. So these are what is now a very popular biblical scholarship that has fleshed out for us modern readers. Somehow Joseph Smith is absolutely nailing in the 1840s. And to me, it screams that this is indeed an ancient text that Joseph Smith is, through the gift and power of God, somehow rendering into English. Now, as I've been reading biblical scholarship, it has really opened my eyes on how I read a particular part of the Book of Abraham, and that is Abraham chapter 3. Abraham chapter 3 is my second favorite chapter in all of Latter-day Saint scripture and all the standard works from the Bible all the way to Pearl of Great Price. My number one is 2nd Nephi chapter 2, but my second is Abraham chapter 3. And studying good biblical scholarship like Dr. Michael Heiser and Dr. Stephen Smoot, I believe he's finished his doctorates, but if he hasn't, he's close. I believe he has, though. Has really expanded how I read Abraham chapter 3, and I'd like to talk about that with you today. The first one that really just made this major connection for me was actually Dr. Michael Heiser when I was reading The Unseen Realm, and he talked about a genre of these ancient writings in the ancient Near East. He taught me about astral and solar religious mythologies. It's a genre of writing where the ancients are looking up into the heavens and comparing the bodies that they see in the heaven, the stars and the planets, which, they don't know the difference per se in the ancient world, but they're looking at these shining bodies and they are likening them to the spiritual realm, the hosts of heaven. And he really points this out and fleshes this out. And he gives several examples from the Hebrew Bible. And the first one that I'm going to go over with is in Job 38. So the author of Job really makes this connection. And it is in Job 38 starting in verse 4, okay? And I'll put it up on the screen so you guys can read aloud. And watch how the author of Job is making this connection between the stars and the hosts of heaven. This is what an astral religious mythology looks like. And this is God questioning Job. He says, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof?" Here it is, verse 7. "When the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God," that's the Bene Elohim, "shouted for joy." So you have the morning stars and the sons of God being likened together, being compared together in this one verse. You see this parallel that he is using he's looking up into the heavens and using an astral religious mythology to describe spiritual things, the spiritual realm. And Michael Heiser fleshes this out in his book. He says, and I quote, "In Job 38, the sons of God are referred to as morning stars. That same description is found outside the Bible in ancient texts from the biblical world. Ancient people thought the stars were living entities. Astral religion and solar mythology were common in the ancient world. The notion that stars were animate beings was part of Israelite thinking. The stars had names, were created by God, was thought of as a divine army. The idea persisted well into the New Testament era. Their reasoning was simple. Many stars moved. That was a sign of life to the ancient mind. Stars were shining glory of living beings. The stars also inhabited the divine realm literally, in the sense that they existed off the earth. The ancients believed that divine beings lived far away from humans, in remote places where human habitation wasn't possible. The most remote place of all was the sky, the heavens. Morning stars are the stars one sees over the horizon just before the sun appears in the morning. They signal new life, a new day. The label works. It conveys the right thought. The original morning stars, the sons of God, saw the beginning of life as we know it, the creation of earth. And so he's explaining how the ancients looked up into the heavens and they could track the stars. They saw that the constellations moved. And so in their mind, these are living beings. They're the glory of living beings, the hosts of heaven. And so they use it in a genre that he calls astral and solar mythology. And when I read that, I was like, Abraham 3. Abraham 3 fits into this genre perfectly. Not only that, I'd say it's the most beautiful and complex solar mythology that I can think of when you compare it to the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. And it really just blew my mind. And so then as I continued my readings, I also ran into, as I read about the book of Abraham, I read Stephen Smoot's A Guide to the Book of Abraham. And I saw him also flesh out this idea from an Egyptological point of view. And I quote, he says, this shift appears to pivot on a play on words in Egyptian. Now he's talking about Abraham 3. The Egyptian word for spirit resembles the word for the light and brilliance of celestial bodies, including the stars, as well as the word for the circumpolar stars, which were identified with the spirit of the deceased king in texts predating Abraham. The book of Abraham's conceptual linkage of souls or spirits with the spirit of the deceased king in texts predating Abraham. This book of Abraham's conceptual linkage of souls or spirits with heavenly bodies, such as stars, works particularly well for an Egyptian perspective, since the stars could additionally be identified with the spirits of the deceased by virtue of these latter's connection with the light and brilliance typical of celestial bodies. This means that from an Egyptian perspective, the astronomical teachings of the Book of Abraham flow seamlessly into the teachings about the pre-mortal existence, which follow immediately thereafter. This blew my mind, okay? So let's look at this connection, because when you look at it from this point of view, as this genre of an astral religious mythology, certain things become clear. It becomes not the weird trope that people make it out to be as some type of science fiction. It's not a science book. It's not teaching you actual astronomy per se. It is likening the hosts of heavens to the spirits, to the souls. So the first half of chapter 3 is the astral religious mythology. And then it flows seamlessly into this connection to the pre-mortal realm. And so when you start looking at these connections, I wrote down some of these connections, you start to see that how Joseph Smith, the translator, is using this terminology. First of all, you see, I want to point this out first, because this is important to the key to understanding the book of Abraham, chapter 3, is verse 22, because there is a number of terms that Joseph Smith seems to be using synonymously in this text. Spirits, souls, intelligences are all the same thing. They're being used synonymously. Okay, and you can see that if you look at verses 22. So look at 22. It says, "Now the Lord had shown unto me, Abraham, the intelligences that were organized before the world was." All right, so he's used intelligences. "And among these, there were many of the noble and great ones. And God saw these souls." So now the intelligences are souls, that they were good. "And he stood in the midst of them. And he said, These I will make my rulers for he stood among those that were spirits. So intelligences, souls, spirits are used synonymously. And then when you realize this genre, that the stars and the planets and the things that he's seeing, describing in the first half, are the same as the spirits, souls, and intelligences, you could actually replace the stars and the names of the planets that he's using and replace it with spirits and replace Kolob with Christ, and it flows seamlessly. You can see that this is the connection that's being made. Specifically, this cool connection between Kolob, how Kolob is explained, defined, and how Christ is defined. And so let's break this down a little bit. So if you look at Abraham chapter 3, 2 through 4, and if you make this swap, look how seamless it is, okay? And I saw the stars, spirits, that they were very great, and that one of them, Christ, was nearest unto the throne of God, the Most High God. And there were many great ones, us as spirits, which were near unto it. And the Lord, the Most High, said unto me, These are the governing ones, the spirits, and the name of the great one is Kolob, Christ. Because it, Christ, is near unto me, for I am the Lord thy God, the Most High God. I have set this Christ, one, to govern all those which belong to the same order as that upon which thou standest. Right? Christ is set to govern all of us. And the Lord, the Most High, said unto me by the Urim and Thummim, that Kolob, Christ, was after the manner of the Lord, the Most High God. So this, not only does it distinguish the two different beings of the Most High God and Christ, but also defines how unified they are, that Christ is like the Most High. He's the nearest unto the Most High God. And you see how it flows seamless when you swap these words out, how they're talking about the same thing. And I write just kind of in my notes here, as I'm picking all this up, I write, interestingly enough, if you understand the ancient Near Eastern worldview of Abraham, which we ought to if we believe it's a genuine ancient text, you can use spirit in place of star or planet, and it totally makes sense. In verses 4 through 13, Abraham uses this astral religious mythology to explain the different glories, the intelligences, brightness, or light of the spirits of the hosts of heaven, and then specifically connects them to us, bridging the ontological gap that the Old Testament doesn't do explicitly. It's absolutely genius and beautiful, I note. See, this is the amazing part. This is why Abraham 3 is so important. Now, while it does convey this genre of the astral religious mythology, like other ancient Near Eastern texts, what it does that the Hebrew Bible doesn't explicitly do is bridge the gap between the hosts of heaven and those on earth to show that we are the same kind of being, that it's us in the premortal realm. This is why Abraham 3 is so important to Latter-day Saint theology. And while it is the most beautiful, complex astral religious mythology that I can think of. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Stephen Smoot, if you're out there, let me know if I'm based or off based, okay? Because I'm totally open to correction. But to me, it makes perfect sense. Look at verse 16 here, where it says, Therefore, Kolob, or we could say Christ, is the greatest of all the Kokabim, which is the spirits, which if you look in the verse 13, that's what it means. So he's the greatest of all the spirits that thou hast seen, because he is nearest unto me. In verse 18, like you see in Job, in verse 18, you see how Abraham bridges the gap between the stars and the spirits. That connection becomes clearer. Let's look in verse 18. Howbeit that he had made the greater star, as also if there be two spirits, one shall be more intelligent than the other. Yet these two spirits, notwithstanding one is more intelligent than the other, having no beginning, they existed before. They shall have no end. They shall exist after, for they are eternal. So he's bridging the gap here, going from talking about the stars as the hosts of heaven to the spirits as the hosts of heaven. Let's see here. There's so many interesting things. Look at, if you compare, I'll put on the screen verses 2 through 4 and compare them to verses 22 through 24, you'll see the repeated language and ideas when talking about the stars in the earlier verses to the spirits in the later verses. And these are some of the terms that are being used. And among all these, there were many of the noble and great ones. These I will make my rulers, the governing ones. And there stood one, Christ, or Kolob, among them that was like unto God, the Most High. So you see these connections, and they're repeated over and over and over. Also important to the context is who the Lord is in the context of Abraham 3. And that you can see that in verse 27. And this is important to understanding it as you're reading it all together. And this is where you see the distinction between who's being identified as the Lord thy God and who's being identified as the one nearest unto him or as the Son of Man. So you see the distinction. And the Lord said, whom shall I send? And one answered, like unto the Son of Man. So we understand that the Son of Man is Christ. Here am I, send me. And another answered and said, here am I, send me. And the Lord said, I will send the first. So you have the Lord thy God in the context of Abraham 3 is the Most High God and the nearest unto him, from the beginning unified with the Most High God, is the one like unto him, Christ, the Son of Man, or Kolob. And Kolob, interestingly enough, has interesting significance. If you're looking, and this is something that Stephen Smoot points out, in the context where we're talking about Kolob, it makes perfect sense for the Egyptian audience, since Kolob, it derives from the ancient language, is probably the word dog, and there is a dog star, Sirius, Canis Majoris, that is very significant and in the Egyptian religion, that it's already religiously significant to them. So it's possible that that is being used on purpose, because in the context of the Book of Abraham, it's being written and said that Abraham's to proclaim this to the Egyptians. So many interesting concurrences. Let me know what you guys think. I love this. How does Joseph Smith write such a complex and beautiful astral religious mythology that seems to reflect the ancient Israelite thinking of the Hebrew Bible and even the New Testament? You see this in 1 Corinthians 15, and you also see it in Revelations, an astral religious mythology of the bodies being compared to heavenly bodies, to stars and planets and such. It is amazing. Let me know. Hey, guys at Informed Saints, Brother Stephen Smoot, if you guys see this, let me know if I'm off base. I'm totally open to correction, but I find it very interesting, and it makes me read the book of Abraham much more carefully. Brother Stephen Smoot, if you would like to come on the channel, I would be happy to pick your brain about your books, because I have a couple of them, and I mean to get this new one that you have on the Pearl of Great Price, because I think you're doing fantastic work. I'd love to have you on and interview you, and I'm sure plenty of people would watch it. Anyway, Saints, what do you guys think about the Book of Abraham? Does this make sense to you? What are your guys' critiques? I'm happy to listen to them. And let me know in the comments. Until next time, Saints, remember to read, do good, and do it in the name of Christ.